Hey everybody, and welcome to this video. Two things before we get started. Number one, if you've been following this channel for a while, thank you. I really appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. Hoping to get back to San Diego soon so I could continue with the Xterra and the Beetle, but I've been up here stuck in Washington with the coronavirus stuff going on, so it's been a while since I've been home. Second thing is, if you've been following along with the Ford Ranger project, this video is actually out of order. I've filmed a lot of stuff and I'm just now getting caught up with all the editing, but we're going to be talking about putting on leveling coils on a Ford Ranger today, and this happened before I put on the 33-inch tires and trimmed the fenders. So that's that. All right, so like I said, we're going to be talking about installing 1.5-inch leveling coils on a Ford Ranger. My truck is a 95 with a 4-wheel drive with a twin traction beam, I-beam suspension. I think the process is pretty much the same whether you have a 2-wheel drive or a 4-wheel drive. The one thing that I know is different on the 4-wheel drive is that there is a stud that is connected to the axle housing, and there is a nut that connects to that to hold the spring on the bottom mount. The I-beam, the 2-wheel drive truck, has a bolt that I think goes all the way through the bottom of the bolt and then into the retaining washer. So that's the only difference. Let's get started with the install. Step 1, jack up the truck. Secure with jack stands. Remove the center cap. And then blast off those lug nuts to remove the wheel. This next part's pretty crucial, especially if you have a rusty truck like mine. PB blaster all over the place. Now, when you're removing the sway bar, I recommend that you actually put some pressure on the bottom of the beam so that the link doesn't pop like they just did there.
That was kind of scary.
Now, my caliper bolts were pretty rusty, so I had to use a really long breaker bar to get them loose. And then whenever I pull the caliper off, I like to hang it from the frame using a zip tie so that doesn't put any pressure on the brake line. Next, we're going to remove the bottom mount on the shock. A pry bar helps really nice here. And then this part really sucks. There's two ways you can do this. You can use a long extension or series of extensions with a socket and come from the top of the coil bucket, or you can use a closed box end wrench like I'm using here. This is a 1 1/8 inch. It's a big guy, and I had to go to the hardware store to pick one up because I didn't have one laying around. This part takes a long time and a lot of patience because there's not a lot of angle you can get on here, and again, PB blaster helps a ton, so spray that down. But yeah, you're just gonna need to be really patient with this. It takes a while.
Oh, finally. All right, stand back.
Be careful when you push the beam down, the spring will just fall out. Now here's a comparison of the two springs. The left is the new one from Rough Country and the one on the right is a factory spring. Next, you're gonna wanna put the little rubber seat thing back on the bottom of the spring here and seat the spring into the coil bucket. Use a jack to lift the beam up a little bit to put some pressure on it, and then you can put the locking washer back on top of the spring and then go back to town with this bolt. And again, this is going to take a long time. So one thing you'll notice here is that I'm going to raise and lower the suspension a little bit from time to time so that I can get a better angle on the nut. It's a pretty tight fit, and again, it takes a whole lot of patience. Tighten the bolt down as hard as you can, and then after about 50 to 100 miles, go back in there and tighten it again to make sure it didn't come loose. Once everything's back together, you can reinstall the shock on the bottom and tighten down the nut. And then reattach the brake caliper. Now this next part is optional. I decided to delete the sway bar altogether. You don't have to do that. I've done this on all of my trucks, but I prefer to do this because it allows for more suspension droop. Once everything's buttoned up, you can put the wheels back on. Here's a shot of the springs in the coil bucket inside the truck. And then a comparison from side to side. You can tell that the camber's a little funky right now. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So here's the rest of the sway bar delete. I decided to take the sway bar off while there was still pressure on the system. That was a lot safer. In hindsight, it probably would have been better to just remove the sway bar before I got started. That would have been a lot easier. Here you can see the really sketch-tacularness of my front bearings on this truck. In the next video, I'll show you how to fix that. Driver's side is the same as the passenger side. Pull off the wheel, undo the shock, take off the caliper, secure the caliper to the frame, and then PV blaster on the lock nut, and just go to town. I won't bore you with the rest of it. It took forever. I think it took about 15 to 20 minutes each side just to pull off the lock nut and then replace it after swapping out the springs. Here's a look of the truck on the ground after installing the coil springs. You're going to notice that the camber is really positive right now, and that's to be expected. That right side over there is towed out, kind of funky. Driving around should get everything settled back the way it's supposed to be, but I would still recommend getting an alignment done on the truck so that the tires wear more evenly. Before taking the truck in, I do recommend ordering a pair of these guys. These are adjustable alignment bushings, and these bolt into the truck so that you can get a little bit more options as far as aligning the caster and the camber. Just make sure you order two, because when I went on O'Reilly, the first time I only ordered one, and that was kind of stupid. I thought it came as a kit because they're so dang expensive. This one was like 54 bucks for one, so yeah. Anyways, overall pretty basic project. I think the hardest part for me was just getting it apart because this truck is so old and rusty and gross. It's not like the trucks we have in California. We don't really have rust where I'm from, so this is all a new adventure for me here in Washington. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Stay tuned for more stuff. We've got a few more projects on the Ranger, and hopefully soon I'll get to go home to San Diego and work on the Xterra or the Beetle. Until then, we'll see you guys next time.